On July 31st, I published my very first poetry book. Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. This is a video telling you about how I did it, all the complications and the steps that I took to get my book self-published, and I hope this can help someone else who is in the process of self-publishing. Let's get into it. Some beginner details. I published my book using Amazon KDP. It's a self-publishing website. You can publish your books independently with no outside publisher, and you can earn profits from your book, and it will be sold directly on Amazon. I think it's a very, very beginner-friendly software. I'm pretty sure it was made to be beginner-friendly, and it's just a great way to start. Before I jump ahead of myself, let's go back to the beginning. What should you do when you first start out? Your first step is to compile your manuscript. I'm assuming that people who are on this video have kind of an idea for what they want their poetry book to look like, or they already have poems that they wrote. So in my case, I wrote poetry without the intention of publishing it. I wrote poetry for about 3 years, and every single year I kind of wanted to publish my poetry, but I never did anything to further that. I kind of just had all my poems in one giant Google Docs. The first step that I did was I went through all my poems and I kind of compiled the ones that I wanted to publish. I know you'll hear a lot of people say oh, you should have a theme, a topic for your book, and you should write with the intention of having a really broad message. And I think that's a great idea for maybe your second book, your third book. But at least for me, I started poetry because I just really loved writing poetry. I didn't do it with the intention of having a concrete theme or writing my poems just about one topic. And so at face value, my poems were a little bit all over the place, but through those, you can kind of find your own sort of topic. So for me, my book, it's called The Words That Describe My Heart. And this book is really just revolved around my teenage years. It has a lot of poems that are about love and identity, and as I was going through all my different situationships and crushes, it had stuff about my family and all my hardships as a teenager. So that was kind of how I packaged my book. It doesn't really have to be very concrete. If you have a message, if you have a theme, if you want to write your poems based on a strategic storyline or something, great, do what you want. But I'm just saying, if you don't worry, and can still kind of sort and compile your poems into a book itself. Now, step 2 in making your manuscript is selecting the order of your poems. So for poetry books in particular, I think the order of the poems really matter. This was also something that I myself got stuck on. I didn't want my poetry book to feel very just categorical. I wanted it still to have my essence and still be true to what I was feeling in the moment and my storyline as a person. There is a bit of balance you have to find with kind of grouping your poems and finding a cohesive storyline so that they can flow into each other while also staying true to, you as a poet. I've seen multiple people do this in different ways. You can either just do it in your Google Docs. I've seen people print out all of their poems and then group it physically by page. That way you can kind of more tangibly see what it will be like when you're flipping through it as a book. I actually made mine was really rough. I opened a OneNote page and I wrote down all the titles of my poems and I just kind of rearranged from there and grouped it in those sections. But group it however you want and make sure your order is what you would want it to be. Now that is basically your rough manuscript done. The second part of making your manuscript is doing all of the formatting. Formatting in poetry books is a pretty important thing. I think you can get really creative with this step based on whether or not you want your poems to, go across the page or be in different shapes. I think poetry especially is something that you can get very artistic with, but also don't worry if you don't want to be artistic. I also had that struggle. I was my poems feel a little boring. They're just they're just written left to right and there's not much shape to it. But as you go through your poems, I kind of found ways to make some of them more unique and some of them to have a little bit extra meaning of some extra spaces or about your indentation and stuff like that. I think the overall theme for this is to just stay true to yourself. I watched so many of these videos of how to publish your own poetry book, and I felt very insecure because I didn't feel like I was a real poet yet because I wasn't taking into account the overall theme or how I should want my poem to form out into a flower while the meaning is also about flowers. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like I was a very good poet necessarily. But I'm here to remind you that it doesn't need to be very fancy. It doesn't need to be very professional. It doesn't need to look like how everyone else does it, because you have your own flourish. Stay true to yourself. The second part about formatting your manuscript is putting it into an actual formatter and putting things like the page numbers, the headers, the runner files, and also aligning like your words. One free resource that I found, which I really, really love, is Affinity Publisher. It is basically like Photoshop, Illustrator, and book formatter all in one. All you need to do is make a Canva account or sign up with your Canva account and you can get Affinity Publisher for free. What I really love about Affinity is that it feels very powerful. The tools all feel very professional, just like if you're using like an Adobe software, but it's free. One thing that I really love is you can format different, they're called master pages. You create a master page which has your formatting. So you can have like your page numbers and your headers, and then you can basically just create separate pages under those master pages, and the same formatting will apply through all of them. And then if you change your master page, it will change across all of the pages. It's just very convenient, very easy to use, and it allows you to change things and keep things very uniform without having to manually go through all of your pages and change the same thing over and over again. I highly recommend checking that out. Another thing is I recommend keeping a very wide margin. I don't like when poetry books have words very close to the edge. I think poetry is a very unique style that a large margin and a lot of white space looks very clean and professional. I kept my margins 1 inch. So you'll see that this is kind of what it looks like. This is a 1 inch margin. And I just like the feel of it better. I didn't like how close to the edges some poetry books were. And I think this just gives it a lot more breathing room, especially for like your longer poems. I think it's a very good way to format your books. One more thing, one key tip I have is if you are using bleed, listen up. So basically, bleed is something that you can do if you want your images or a page color to extend all the way to the edge of a page. So for example, as you can see, this color extends all the way to the edge at the top, but at the bottom, it has this white space. So that's the difference between like bleed and no bleed. If you have bleed, it will extend to the top. If you don't have bleed, it will leave a white margin. What I really love about using bleed is I can create these kind of like section pages. As you can see on the side, I don't know if you can see very well, but when you have pages that are different colors, especially like black and dark, you will be able to see the section pages from the side. And I really liked that because I wanted each section to be very easy to find. So I needed to use bleed to have these big section pages be fully colored. If you're using Affinity Publisher, they have a very handy tool called Bleed. And you'll see that and you'll be like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. This is what Amazon KDP tells me to do, and that will be perfect. But no, do not use Affinity Publisher's Bleed. Not because it's bad, but because that is not what KDP wants. When you want Bleed, Amazon KDP makes you add 0.125 inches to the outer, top, and bottom edges. Not the inner. Not the inner, only the outer, top, and bottom. KDP wants you to format your actual manuscript, like your actual page document. So my trim size is 5.5 times 8.5. I think that's pretty standard for poetry book. The height is 8.5. And then when you add your trim, it will be plus 1.25 and plus 1.25. So the whole thing will be 8.75. Your width, since you only have the outer bleed and not the inner bleed, it will be 5.5 plus only 1.125. It will be 5.625. I formatted my pages to show as a spread because I wanted to see what the book will look like when it was opened. The width of one page is 5.5. The width of 2 pages would be 11. But then you need to add your bleeds respectively on the outer sides. So this will be 11.25 because you have one bleed here and one bleed here. Does that make sense? My point being, you want to change your actual document to include the bleed. And then when you're setting your margins, you will need to account for that bleed. Amazon KDP makes you add 0.125 to your pages because that will be chopped off when they're making the book itself. You have your regular document. If you added bleed, then you have to add space for margin as well so that everything is still the same. That's just a really big mistake that I made that caused me a lot of pain and stress because I had to go through and like reshift all of my margins and like reshift my text. So don't make the same mistake that I did. That is part 2 of formatting your manuscript. Now I move on to step 2, which is editing. So when you have your book all formatted, I suggest you print a proof copy. I ordered a proof copy, and this way I could look through my entire book, and I went through with a pen and I literally just annotated everything that I wanted to fix and edit. This could be things like punctuation, spacing, whether or not you want to do something cool with your spacing, grammar, words, different ways you want to word your poems. This is my first proof, and you can see that I just wrote small annotations to myself, and I kind of just like notated things like deleting like a punctuation, a comma. This is just a really clear way to kind of like really comb through your poems and make sure that it is exactly how you want it and polished. Reading your poems on the screen feels a lot more different than reading it in your physical book. I highly suggest printing out a proof copy, ordering a proof copy straight from Amazon and annotating here. Hi guys, as you can tell, it's a new day. I'm in a new space. I'm going to start off here now. Talk about step 3, which is designing your cover. So the cover is very important because everyone says don't judge a book by its cover, but everyone judges a book by its cover. I think the most important thing is just to find something that speaks to you. In poetry books especially, there's a very normalized format. If you just do one search for like a poetry book, I feel like you can tell the format of like a neutral background and like a line outline. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but I'm saying that it can be very kind of formulaic and it can kind of just like fall in line with everything else if you're doing it only because that's what everyone else does. If you like the style, go for it. But I think ultimately the cover should really be like a reflection of you and a reflection of your poems and your book and the thought behind this book. So I would just heavily encourage you to not do something just because everyone else is doing it and not feel that pressure to like conform. Because ultimately, if your book stands out, that's ultimately better for you. One thing that Amazon KDP wants you to do is they want you to have front cover, the spine, and then the back cover all on one image. So when designing your cover, it's very important to look at the Amazon guidelines and look at the specific dimensions that you must hit in order for your cover to line up correctly. The first time I made my cover, the spine didn't line up and like the words were a little too big. So just make sure to carefully read the description. And they also have a really handy like cover calculator, which gives you literally the exact dimensions based on your page number and like your file size. So I think that's very helpful. I went through a lot of different iterations for my book. Since my book is called Words That Describe My Heart, I originally wanted something that was related to a heart. I had this image of like having like an anatomical heart, but ultimately after many iterations and design mock-ups, I found that I wasn't really vibing with it. It wasn't really speaking to me. I went for something a little bit different. One of the poems in my book is about sunshine spilling on the sidewalk and like the shadows that it paints. I really wanted to take inspiration from that. I went out into the world and I took some images of shadows of leaves on the ground specifically for my cover, and I used Affinity to edit the colors and to get this like really nice contrast and grain. And I ended up using that image for my cover background. I'll give you guys a look at my cover. So this is my cover, and I don't know if you can tell, but the cover is one cohesive image. So I wanted the front and the back cover to kind of connect in the actual photo. So it's a really subtle detail, but I really like how it looks. And as you can see, it's like the tree leaves, and I really like it. I think it looks really unique and also very cool. I just have my title up top, I have a poetry collection, and then I have my author name. And then on the back, I have a little bit of a blurb. It's a section from one of my poems, and something that's meaningful is I wrote this poem on July 31st, and it was about how I want to be an artist and I want to be a writer and like create art that like changes the world or like impacts someone's lives. So I decided to schedule my book publication release to be on July 31st, 3 years later. So yeah, that is the meaning behind my publication date and why this poem is on the back. I just wanted to share that little bit of an Easter egg. Also, another thing to consider is the orientation and the direction of your spine. I would keep it very simple and something that people can like recognize and immediately see from far. That is one of the final steps in this process. You have your manuscript, you have your cover. Now all that's left to do is sort out the logistics. So first, I would schedule out your publication date. Amazon gives you two options. You can either schedule your publication date or you can just edit as you go, and then when you're done you can hit publish, and it'll take like 3 to 5 business days to actually publish. Second is pricing. Honestly, it's a lot of your own preference, but you also have to kind of look at the poetry world. A lot of poetry books these days are in like the teens. Some of the really famous authors have more cheaper books, like $8 to $9, but a lot of them are like $10 to $11 to up to like $16. I think a big important factor is factoring in the value of your work and your time. How long your book is, the longer it is, the more poems there are, obviously it's going to be worth more. And also factor in the royalties you'll get. Amazon has a really great calculator for you. You have your listing price and then you multiply that by 60%, which is your royalties. After that, you have to subtract the printing cost of your book. I'd go into the Amazon KDP calculator and like test out different prices. You can like search online for similar poetry books to yours and see what they're priced at. And just make sure you have a good ballpark about what you actually will be earning per book. And also just factor in like what feels right to you and like what you think your work is worth. That's my tips on pricing. Other small logistics that you'll run into are things like writing your title and your subtitle, your description box for what it will be listed as on Amazon, things like your keywords and your categories, which are important for like when people search your book, what it will be categorized under. And they'll also have you choose like your page type. I chose cream with black and white ink because I didn't have any pictures that I needed in color. They also have options like groundwood paper, which is more eco-friendly, everything like that. A lot of my research I did through Google, through YouTube videos, through like ChatGPT. I would say they're pretty straightforward. It's just tedious to work through. So give yourself a lot of time before your intended publication date to work through the details, because you don't want to work up until your publication date and then realize you still have to wait like 5 business days for it to actually get published. So yeah, but now you've moved on to step 5, which is advertising and publishing. If you have a following or a platform, I would highly suggest advertising it there, sharing your work, being proud of it, getting people to support you. If you have friends, family, community, classmates, anyone who will buy your book is great. And I think regardless, this is already a huge step towards putting your work out there. So I think regardless of how many people buy it, I think you should be very proud of yourself. My book is Words That Describe My Heart. It's available on Amazon, and this is my first ever poetry book. I learned a lot through this process, and I know you will too. I think I will be writing a second book, and hopefully many more to come. So just getting started, and I will hopefully try to expand more into like Barnes & Nobles or like other bookstores. So if I learn about that, I will let you guys know. I think poetry is something that is amazing and really changed my life, and I'm so excited for you to start your own journey. Biggest advice is to just start right now. Just start, and everything else you will get through and you will learn. Let me know if there's anything that I missed that you would like guidance on. Help others out in the comments, and if I said something wrong, please correct me as well. Comment down below in the comments what part of the process you're in, what your poetry book is about. You can advertise in the comments and support other people. If you like, I'll have my poetry book linked in the description. That's all I have. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys for the next one. Bye bye!